Are you struggling to decide where to study abroad? In this video, I'm going to cover 3 different factors to consider along your journey. If you are new to my channel, welcome. I'm Kimber, the Study Abroad Specialist. If you're returning, welcome back. I hope that this video is going to be helpful for you. So I want to talk to you today about a common question that I get asked as a study abroad advisor when I'm first starting to work with students, and they are just kind of diving in. They obviously know a little bit about study abroad, but one of the main questions they have is, where do I decide to go? And this can be very tricky because this question is very individualized for every single person because everyone is different. There are 3 different things that I always recommend that students consider as they start thinking about where they might want to go and what they kind of want to do with their study abroad programming. So the first thing that I want you to think about is going to be your personality. So this is going to be a very important factor. This is important when you are going out and choosing a uni or a college, even for people when they're thinking about what type of job they want. Obviously, whatever you want to do, your personality is going to play a factor. And one of the things that's really going to be important as you start thinking about where you want to study abroad is, what is the overall culture of that place? So I can give you an example. If you are a really extroverted person, you're really outgoing, you're really into doing social things, and let's say you are from, maybe you're from the UK, because that's the opposite of the overall culture of the UK, you may want to consider coming to a place like the United States. The United States is very much a social place. People tend to be on the edge of much more outgoing than more introverted. People like to get involved. Random strangers will come up and talk to you all the time. That's not uncommon. Whereas if you go to a different place, let's say like the UK, that is considered kind of weird. And so that's just one example, but you also too want to think about, in terms of where you're actually going to be studying, what is going to be the overall culture of the school that you're going to. Is it going to be a school that is much more focused on, let's say, these social aspects, and maybe it trends more towards party school? Or is it going to be a school that's very heavy on academics? These are all things that students tend to a lot of times overlook. They are more or less thinking about the location and how exciting it's going to be to be in this new place, and all those things are great, but you also need to factor in your personality as well. In terms of the other aspects of your personality, do you want to live with other people? Do you want to live alone? That also factors in, because for some programs, you're required to live with other people. For other programs, you may be able to live on your own. And it really just depends on what your type of program is. But you need to think about that, because a lot of times students will decide where they want to go based on what is offered. So it could be that maybe where you are actually going, you get more money, but let's say you get a scholarship, but then you have to live with other people. Maybe to you, it's worth it to have to pay a little bit more out of pocket to be able to live on your own. So you just want to think about your personality as a starter. So the next thing that we are looking at for number 2 is going to be your short and long-term goals. Now, this is something that you will see in the starter worksheet that you will get started with. So you're a little bit ahead of the game, but a lot of times study abroad students or prospective study abroad students don't always think about this in this way. They just see the idea of study abroad of, this is going to be fun. It's going to be a vacation of sorts. I'm going to get to go away and travel and do all these things. But as with anything in life, you need to make sure that your particular route and your pathway to study abroad is tied to some goals, because again, it is an expensive endeavor. It is something that's going to take time. It is something that is contributing overall to your education. So you want to make sure that you have planned out both short-term and long-term goals. So when thinking about what those look like, for short-term goals, maybe your short-term goal when you're studying abroad is just to enhance a foreign language that you will want to learn. So you are coming from the US and you want to travel to Italy, and your goal is to, within the 6 months you're going to be there, make sure that you've moved up to the next level of speaking Italian. It could be something basic like that. Maybe it is a short-term goal of enhancing your personal network so that for the following summer, you're able to consider internships in different places, or at least say, I've met people from different places and this has been really exciting. Another short-term goal that a lot of students have is just fulfilling credit requirements. So you may be using this as a time, like a lot of students do, to get elective credits, particularly if you are from North America, but even students outside of North America use this for the study abroad time for getting elective credits, because you've kind of gone through and you've done all the necessary kind of hardcore credits that you need to do, but you have so many electives and you're like, this is going to be amazing. I get to study abroad and also fill elective requirements. That is great. And so that may be short-term goals. It can really be whatever you want, but you also want to think about how your short-term goals play into your long-term goals. So one of the primary long-term goals that a lot of students have, particularly in this day and age, is that they want to work internationally. And so study abroad can definitely be a tee up for that if it's something that you want to do. You feel like maybe after you graduate or even later down the road, you want to work internationally. Study abroad is going to give you an entryway to that, because of course you're going to be there, you're going to get to meet people, maybe make some connections, maybe even internship. And so you have those long lasting connections that you can use further down the road. So that is definitely a prominent long-term goal. Even if you are not interested in working internationally, a lot of students want the ability to have that they have studied abroad on their resume. Again, that is a part of a long-term strategy, because it may come in use later on as you are applying, maybe not even for your first or second job, it could be your third job out of college. And as the recruiters are going through, they're looking at different skill sets and they're like, hey, this particular person worked, maybe they did an internship in this particular country and that sounds really interesting, or they know this language and they were able to go to this place and enhance the language. We want to know about this person more. So there have been instances I know from students I work with where that comes into play. So that is a long-term goal that you may have. You could just have where you are someone who you're really interested in travel, but this is going to be your first sort of entry into doing that. And so you just want to kind of learn more about what it feels like to be on your own a little bit more, be a bit more independent, and you're using study abroad for that way. So again, there's no right or wrong answer with your short-term and long-term goals, but that's something that you definitely want to sort of at least have an idea of what they are, because that will help you decide where you want to study abroad. If it is a place that maybe you have no interest in ever visiting again, or it was someplace that you had never even heard of until you started researching study abroad, maybe that particular location is not great for you. Whereas you may want to look at countries or cities or wherever that could be closely related to whatever field you want to go in, or may have lots of jobs afterwards that you could potentially get, or may have different industries where you can, at least while you're there studying abroad, make different connections. And so you want to think of it from that perspective of both your short term and your long term, and definitely use a starter worksheet to sort of synthesize all that and put that together. So money is a very important factor when it comes to study abroad. As you probably know, it is a very expensive endeavor, as I've said before. And there are a couple of factors that students think about when it comes to money and study abroad. So number one, tuition and housing are going to be your most expensive things that you will spend money on when it comes to study abroad. So it never fails when students are thinking about tuition and housing. That's why a lot of students like to do, let's say, the single semester programs, because even though they are expensive, they tend to be all inclusive. So your tuition and your housing are included. You're just going to pay the flat fee. And then what will happen is you'll have to pay for your other expenses and everything. But at least those two big expenses are taken care of. Whereas for students who are going to be either doing some type of independent program, or if you're going to be doing a degree program where you're going to be there for longer, it is going to take up a lot of your money overall. So once you have your tuition and your housing covered, those are the big ones. And then you have to think about your living expenses. You have to think about what your visa expenses might look like. You have to think about what your travel expenses to get to and from the place are going to look like. But tuition and housing are the biggest ones. So outside of that, the other thing that students tend to sort of think about is, can I get any scholarships? So that is another big question that a lot of students have. We know that scholarships are the preferred financial aid because you don't have to worry about paying them back. And a lot of times they don't have as many stipulations as, let's say, grants, where even though you don't have to pay a grant back, a lot of times they may be tied to a lot of things that you are required to do to keep that grant. So a lot of students are always on the hunt for scholarships. So does your particular program offer any scholarships? or is that something that you may have to pursue on your own? If you're going to be looking for independent scholarships, what does that look like? How do you actually go through the process of applying? So that is another thing that you will need to consider. And also too, will the either school that you're going to or even the country that you're going to honor those scholarships? These are all questions that you need to ask and factor in as you're going through and looking. Last but not least, I would just say that in terms of the money, a lot of students are thinking about their overall budget, which is really important. So I always recommend for students that you go through way before you even get into a program and start mapping out your budget. If you look into the description box, I also have a template for that as well. And basically what you're doing is you're trying to think right now, if you were to go and study abroad, what would that look like for you in terms of what you spend money on? Because you're not really going to be that different in terms of what you actually need or what you want once you get abroad. And so what do you spend money on right now? And then find ways to cut that wherever you can, just so that you give yourself a little bit of a cushion, because currency exchanges and all of that are a lot different, and they're a lot difficult to work with when there's economic downturn and all of those things factored in. So you're going to want to consider that. And the other piece of that is a lot of students think, well, how can I actually make money? Maybe you are only getting a small allowance from your parents while you're going to be away, but it may not be enough to cover your sort of basic living experiences, or maybe just to have fun money, as we like to say. And so how do you do that? Now, one of the things that I always like to preach about, I know a lot of my students get tired of hearing about it, but when you're thinking about going and getting a job while you're abroad, you always want to make sure that you are above board with that. I don't know how many times I can say that, this is no longer 2007, 2008, where countries are a little bit more lax and they just kind of look the other way. Countries will absolutely kick you out, whether you are, number one, overstaying your visa, or number two, working below the table, as we say, trying to avoid taxes, trying to avoid being on the radar. That is not something that you want to get involved in this day and age. It doesn't mean that people don't do it, but as your study abroad coach, I definitely want to encourage you not to do it. It's not going to be good. If you get kicked out of the country, that's basically going to go on your permanent record in a way. You may not ever be able to go back there again, and it really was not worth it to be making, let's say, $15 an hour under the table. It just was not worth it to be able to risk that. So you don't want to do that. There are lots of ways that students can get jobs while they study abroad. And one of the things that you want to do is just consider what the parameters are of your visa. So for most student visas around the world, it typically is going to be a part-time allowance where you're allowed to work part-time. Maybe that's 20 to 25 hours per week. And so you may be working a couple hours a night at one place. Maybe you get a couple small jobs where they all fall under having you just at 25 hours per week. And a lot of times there are different forms that your employer will need to sign off on. If you are interested in learning more about what types of jobs a lot of study abroad students tend to get, I want you to go ahead and watch this video so that you can be informed and make sure that you are making the best decision for where you want to study abroad and how you're going to make money when you do it.